Education is always a big challenge because everybody thinks they know how to educate. And about every 10 years, people get a new idea. And the ideas that are absolutely most important today, 30 years ago, they were talking about something else. And whatever you're fighting about today, particularly in some of the evaluations and the data and a lot of that, 10 years from now, there's going to be something else. Because I've seen the different iterations through one state board and then another. It always changes. So there's a lot of fads going on. And at the end of the day, it's teachers, it's kids, it's family, and it's the money that it takes to run the whole system. And those are the constants. And in recent years, we're really short on the money. There's no question about that. California ranks, depending on how you do it, near the bottom. We don't have enough investment in our kids, in our infrastructure, in our schools. People know that. But there's such an image that government is waste. In fact, we've taken polls, and they say that the average estimate of the waste in government is 40%. 40%. Well, of $90 billion general fund, 40%, that's $36 billion. It's what I like to call the waste bank. If we could just go to the waste bank and take out half the money, we could pay for everything we need. The trouble is, there is no such waste bank. I mean, there's a lot of ordinary human beings, and sometimes they screw up. Sometimes they do things that don't look so good, like the people who are in our parks department that were squirreling away money. And you know why they got away with that? By the way, they're not there anymore. We sent them packing, so they're gone. So don't worry about the parks. Some people, I go to these newspapers, and they say, you know what? You found $50 million in the parks, so therefore we should cut $6 billion from the schools. Well, they didn't go to the right school because their arithmetic isn't so good. Because the parks, see, the finance department is always looking for people who spend money improperly. That's what all the controls are about, trying to catch people and making sure that the money isn't misspent. No one ever thought people wouldn't spend money. It just didn't never occur to anybody. So now we're putting in some new controls. So yeah, they did find 20 million. It was in different from fees, and there was another 30 million on off-road vehicles. And the only thing you can spend it for is building those nice little roads up and down the mountains for those noisy little vehicles to go. So I think a lot of people probably don't want us to spend that 30 million. But anyway, it's a little special fund, and so that, in comparison to the 90 billion, is very, very tiny. And the truth is, we got a big state. And with 38 million people, 6 million kids, I mean, those numbers are boggling. But we know that tens of thousands of teachers are not working today that were working just a few years ago. You experienced it on the front line. And it's not getting any easier. It's getting a lot tougher. And in the society, there's not as much latitude or as much tolerance. People are always kind of pointing fingers. And our big challenge here is to communicate that idea that we are all in it together. That's what President Obama's been saying. That is a different idea than the Romney idea that, you're on your own. Or I don't know what his idea is, because it's, I guess his idea is you should only pay 14% on your income tax. Well, that's a hell of an idea. The only trouble is you can't start 3 wars and start a whole big superpower system and think you're only going to pay 14%. So that's a little bit of the problem here. So, so we have this image in the public. Government is the problem. Government is a waste. And people don't think about, well, what about the church? I've read some bad stories about some of those characters. Okay? Now we look at the media. How about the LA Times? They're not doing so well, right? So you know about, and how about the Sacramento Bee? These people borrowed all this money, and they thought they were going to buy, and they bought more newspapers, and then pretty soon the internet hits, the circulation goes down, and they start firing people to pay, so they got to pay all the debts that they incurred because they were expanding, because they didn't really understand where the world was going. So why don't we say that's waste? Why don't we blame that? And so I don't care whether you look at churches, whether you look at the newspapers, you look at state government, you look at schools, there's always an issue, there's always a problem. But I think we got to understand that with all these flaws, we are in it together, and the fundamentals are you need good schools, you got to encourage teachers, not try to find out who you can punish, but who you can encourage. I mean, that's what it takes. And, you know, at the same time, we got to encourage everybody. We still have to fight our adversaries. So it's a little tricky. You got to fight, but you got to know when to, you know, when to hold and when to fold. Now, right now, we got a couple of fights, and it's pretty clear. It's not time to hold or to fold. It's time to fight when it comes to people who try to take away your power and ability to aggregate your money and your dues and your forces to be able to fight for your survival and the improvement of schools. So 32, that people are kind of getting that one. You know, in the beginning it was coming out, people said, hey, that sounds pretty interesting. We'll take money out of politics. Well, it doesn't do that. It only takes money from the hands of working people so that the billionaires can run the show. And it's pretty amazing. It's this whole money in politics. In fact, when I ran for Secretary of State, I was saying as Secretary of State, I'm going to be the Chief Elections Officer and I'm going to fix all this. Well, I have to tell you, it got worse after I got elected. It's just all this money, and I don't know how, it's not clear how you can deal with it. But one thing you shouldn't do is take one side, which are members of trade unions and public sector unions, say, no, you can't have a dues checkoff, and that's someone going to clean it up. But the Koch brothers, or the Koch brothers, or however you call them, and the billionaires, they can do whatever the hell they want to do, because they have the constitutional right of free speech, but you don't. Well, that is not only a dumb idea, it's a bad idea. And we're going to beat 32. At the same time, we have to have a little yes on 30 here, because that's important. Now, 30 is not perfect, by the way. There's nothing perfect in government. Everything we do, the next year we got to change it, or at least amend it. But it's really important because we built the budget on assuming we're going to get that money. If we don't get it, then those trigger cuts go into effect. No, right. Well, then let's better win. I'm going to do everything I can to win it. And we're ahead. We're ahead by 12 points, and we can stay ahead. We can win this thing. And I want to just give you a little bit of the historic context on how we got here. I wanted to extend the existing tax. I couldn't get any of these Republicans to vote for it, no matter how much I whined them and dined them. So we had to do an initiative. So then I thought, well, we'll do half-cent sales tax and 2%, because I didn't want to rock the boat too much. And then the AFT, right here, they got their thing going, and they want to do 5% forever, and they were polled a hell of a lot better. So I knew if I didn't get them off, we were going to lose. I figured they might lose too, so that wouldn't have been good. So then we made a deal, and they came down to 3, made it for 7 years. We cut the sales tax and to a quarter. So there's only one real argument against this tax, and that is that it goes up and down because the stock market and the rich sometimes make more money one year than they do the next year, and so the taxes go down. But the truth is that the way this tax is engineered, it's pretty darn fair. Because when you talk about people paying 1%, 2%, or 3% more on their taxes, that doesn't start till they make $500,000. 80% of the people who pay taxes pay as married couples. Now, so that starts at $500,000. So if you make $1 million, you'd pay $7,500 more in taxes to the state, and you deduct it on your federal, so it would amount to about maybe $4,200. After you've made $1 million, actually you made more because you had some deductions. So it's a very small tax, but it yields about $6 billion, or $5 billion. And then the sales tax, which is a quarter cent, which means if you buy something for $4, you're going to pay 1 penny more. And that yields a couple of billion. So that means everybody puts in a little, and the people at the top put in more. But it's a tiny fraction of what they're earning. And I bet if I said, if you could make $1 million a year, would you pay 3% more in your tax? I bet most of you would. I bet anybody would. The other thing about the tax is, I like to compare. When I was governor in 1975, the personal income of all Californians added up to about 150 billion. Now it adds up to about almost 2 trillion. So there's been a big growth, and there's a lot of people too. It's not like a lot of people are poor now, believe it or not. But of the people who are at the top, the 1%, they're taking home 22%, and 30 years ago they took home 8%. So when you're slicing off 22% of 2 trillion instead of 8% of 150 billion, that's what happened. Now, when the 1% gets 22, that means that a lot of other people have to get less, and that's exactly what happened. And as a matter of fact, the middle class has shrunk, and people below the middle class are having an even harder time. So when you look at this tax, it's not only popular, which it is, but it's also fair. And it is fair. Now, the fact that income taxes vary, that becomes a problem. But in terms of pure justice and fairness, people who did so well, they can give back a little. And that's really what it is. So it's hard to believe that anybody would be against Proposition 30. It's fair. That doesn't mean people, you know, those Howard Jarvis fellows, they want to make it sound like everybody's going to be paying it. But the whole country, when you look out in the world, is, I mean, we've been suffering for a long time. I mean, from the disconnect here. George Bush said we're going to war, and we're going to lower your taxes to pay for it. Now, they actually believe that. And there's been a bunch of theory called supply-side economics that has some plausible theories about all that stuff. But I got to tell you, it's pretty simple. That if the theory is that if the rich people don't make enough money, they won't work hard enough. That it'll be a deterrence to work, savings, and investment. Well, I can tell you, my salary has been cut, by the way, because they cut the big shots. I'm working harder. I'm saving more. I'm working harder. So, of course, I don't care what you pay me. I'm going to run for governor. So that's kind of the only thing my father taught me growing up. I didn't learn how to do that. So, anyway, if you take this tax, and you got some guy who got $1 million, okay, so he pays us $7,500. If he makes $2 million, you're going to get $30,000 out of him. But that money is invested in various accounts. That's what people do. They invest their money. They can't spend it all. So they got to put it in different places. Some of it's in the Grand Cayman Islands, some of it's in Asia, some of it's where? It's all over. Now, if you take that 3% away from that guy and you put it into the schools, all that money is going to go to a teacher, to a librarian, and they're not going to put it in the Grand Cayman Islands. They're going to spend it. They're going to spend it right here in California. So, in a very real sense, I mean, this is not the biggest stimulus in the world, but to the extent that this tax has an impact, it stimulates jobs in California, because all the money gets taken from wherever the hell it was, and it comes right here. And about 35% will come to LA, and that's good. That's what you need. So, and then when we pass the tax, then we can start arguing about school reform and all that. And I'm going to get some of the reformers and the U and CTA and AFT. We're going to sit down and see if we can't find some common ground here. I'm not saying we will, but we'll find some path forward. I like to do that. I'm going to work at it. I got a hunch, though, at the end of the day, that the human brain hasn't changed that much. So whatever it takes to learn is going to be the same today as it was about 50 years ago. And what it's going to take is some human being who knows what she's doing or he's doing and can work in a good environment that's positive and have some good textbooks and maybe a few technical aids and has the right environment to get things done. I mean, it's not that complicated. And everybody's trying to, I have a bill on my desk. It's a bill, in fact, I haven't signed it yet, so I'll share it with you. It's a bill to create a joint powers agreement with UC, Cal State, community colleges, superintendent of instruction, a couple of other entities, and they're going to form a joint powers to form an even bigger database. They're going to take CalPads, and they're going to make a super CalPads, and they're going to start collecting data from preschool to postgraduate. They're going to get all that. Now, I don't know if I'm going to sign that bill. I'm not going to sign that bill. First of all, I grew up in the McCarthy period where we didn't like the government to know everything about us. And I don't want to know. Now, I got kicked out of school one day. I don't want that in my CalPads report that follows me for the rest of my life. But that's kind of what they want. The theory now is that you get your personal identifier, all the kids have them, and then that personal identifier can be used it's never going away. Now, I'm sure there's some help, but you know what? All that information you have right now in your own school district. You still have all that data. It's all there. You can use it or not use it. But at the end of the day, you got to walk into a classroom. You got 25 or 40, sometimes more than that. You got to deal with it. How do you deal with that? And that's the big question. It isn't so much about data. It's about kids. It's about adults. It's about having enough resources to get the job done. By the way, you know, if they created something called Govern for America, and they took young kids out of college from the Ivy League and said, we're going to run you for governor and attorney general and mayor, you know what? I'd rather find a little bit of experience, because I can tell you, being on the job for 35 years, I know a hell of a lot more than I used to know. And so I never underestimate seniority. I think seniority is pretty damn good, as a matter of fact. So, anyway, by the way, I got a D in physics. But I got an A in chemistry. And I got a D in geometry, I got an A in algebra. So I have a very inconsistent mind. And anywhere I go, if I have a little time, I like to play a little experiment. I ask people, can you tell me what the quadratic equation is? 95% of the people can't. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn it. I'm all for STEM and this and that, but I can tell you, with a D in geometry and a D in physics, you can become governor of California and never forget it. But, now, I'm for excellence. I like learning, and you know, I want to up the standards, and we want all that. But everybody's so different. I feel I'm different. And I don't want to be standardized, I don't want to be homogenized, I don't want to be pushed into one mold. So, on the other hand, you know, we like to get scores and all that, so it's always a balance. But when we think of all this data, I think of teachers that have left an impression on me. And one teacher, 12th grade, English teacher, one of the semester questions was a simple question. I want an essay on your impression of a green leaf. I wrote something. It was pretty dull and thoughtless. I don't know, I was unimpressed. But to this day, when I'm often out there looking at trees or green leaves, I think, what is my impression? Do I have an impression? Am I dead inside? What is my level of sensitivity and imagination? So that teacher in the 12th grade, way back in 1955, left a lifelong impression because he stimulated my imagination. What the hell should I have in reaction to a green leaf? What's the secret there? So anyway, there's different kind of things to learn, as well as, you know, arithmetic and geometry and physics and all those other good things. I want to learn all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the effect you have on the children in front of you. And when I went to study to be a Jesuit priest, because I had Jesuits, it wasn't because of the data, it was because of the human relationship And I wanted to identify, I did identify with, and I really admired the teachers. And I wanted to be like them. And it's that relationship that stimulates learning, because getting the motivation and the curiosity and the commitment, that's what it takes. And the only way you get that is to model it yourself, and the only way you can do that is the training, the environment, the encouragement, and the solidarity of a school that works for everybody. That's what Proposition 30 is going to help pay for. Go out there and yes on 30, no on 32. Let's take this state back. For all of us. Thank you.